Hi, I'm Rachel Williams, Chief Editor of Pool and Spa Professional. I'm here from the show floor at the PSP Deck Expo with Randy Tumber, who is President of Tumber International Landscape Training. Randy, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, I wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about your design philosophy, which leans towards naturalistic design. Can you tell us about that and why that's been your preference?
Yeah, years ago, when I first got into landscaping, as it were, I very quickly realized that it was a very transient way of doing things. You may remember the red zigzag lockstone of the 70s, and then the exposed aggregate of the 80s, and all the lockstone swirls and circles of the 90s and so forth, and so many things, that the trends that just kept on coming and going. And I always wanted to be some of these leading edge architects, until after a while it started to occur to me that, wait a minute, these aren't cutting edge ideas. These are ideas that are driven by the manufacturers, who are going to the architects and saying, here, use our stuff. And I thought, I'm starting to get clients phoning and saying, can you come and rip out all this stuff that's passé now and put in something that isn't going to keep changing the fads and the trends and everything? And it became evident to me that the only thing that will stand the test of time, that doesn't constantly get diluted, is natural elements, natural stone, natural plant material, natural styles. And so I very quickly realized that I had a lot to learn, so I started to study as much as I could about what I could discover in creation, and how one thing equates to another, and the symbiotic relationships that are woven throughout the entire ecosystem. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to try to do my best to create something that will stand the test of time and that transcends all of these passing fads. And lo and behold, I found a niche, albeit a very small one, but I have found that appeals to a lot of people. But I also realized that I was going to sacrifice a lot of my potential workload, and I'm okay with that. I've been down the road of a bunch of guys and 3 construction crews and a maintenance crew, and all I did was run myself ragged, and I found that I got more satisfaction out of pulling it back down to one project at a time, one crew, and we did everything in-house other than gas and electrical. And by doing that, we were able to have full control of the way things were. So we utilized things like natural stone and wood and water and all those kinds of things that we see around us, because it occurred to me that nobody doesn't love nature. So I went down that rabbit hole, if you will, and it just kind of expanded from landscaping design to construction to aquatics to native habitat restoration, natural stonework, all these kinds of things, and they all flowed very nicely together. And my mantra is, we make believers one person at a time, and we truly do with each client. And they say, oh my goodness, I wish I had called you sooner. These ideas make so much sense. And now there's a huge movement with everyone trying to save the planet, which is a noble intention. But until you understand how these natural ecosystems function with each other, you can't really develop it and build around that. So I've tried to do that, and I try to stay away from the things that are so lineal and square, flat, one-dimensional, chrome stainless steel glass. I just don't see that in natural environments. So I try to create something that is natural in approach, in appeal, and in function. So we use native plant materials wherever possible. We integrate the water features into them in a very natural way, and we've had a good following along those lines, and it's been very good to me.
Great. Well, one of the benefits you just mentioned was eco-friendliness. So can you tell our audience a little bit more about, how this naturalistic design style also benefits the planet, as you said?
Well, again, something as simple as permeable pavers, rather than, the first thing you do in landscaping is you have to address stormwater management. Well, instead of trying to express the water off the property as quickly as possible, down the gutter, into the storm drain, into our creek, and into our lakes and our oceans, and sending all the pollutants and windshield washer, antifreeze, transmission fluid, motor oil, gas, diesel, everything, rubber. We try to deal with the water on site. Each individual property, we deal with it on site. So permeable pavers is a prime example of that. Let it percolate down, let it get filtered through natural processes and go back into the aquifers and recharge our aquifers, because we're all wanting for fresh water. And so it's one of the things that kind of dovetails nicely with everything else that we're doing. So we plant things up in such a way that the root system is going to get well established. It's native. It's as close to zero maintenance as you're going to get. And we use ground covers and natural mulches and things like that. Try to avoid, again, some of the more trendy things like the black mulch with the dye in it, and where they're using too much recycled wood, recycled pallets with potential hazardous materials that have been spilled on them in warehouses or whatever, or pressure treated lumber decking that's been pulled out and recycled, and then they put a pretty color into it and then market it as recycled. Well, okay, it is recycling, but it's putting toxic stuff, potentially toxic stuff, into the gardens. But there's so much hardwood in the pallets that in order for that to decompose through natural processes, it takes so much out of the soil, and it actually short circuits the plant food process, because the plants need the decomposing wood and bark, etc., in order to provide the micronutrients to survive, and yet the hardwood takes way too much out of it. So we don't want to shortchange the plant. So if we use, in Canada, we try to use the 100-mile rule, so you don't truck the stuff halfway across the country, but spruce, pine, fir, cedar, a bit of hemlock from the local mills, and it's ground up, and you use the bark and just the tender stuff, and so we put that on 2 or 3 inches thick, and that provides the natural base to retard weed growth and to insulate the roots from the hot sun, to retain moisture. And it also, as it's breaking down, it provides micronutrients for the plant food process. So you're working in harmony with what we find in creation. That's my big goal. So there's lots of benefits from working, understanding how does this natural cycle work? How can I make it that I fit into it rather than forcing it to fit me?
Well, that's a very important point, and it's great to hear that you not only focus on that with your design, but also with the suppliers that you're using. And kind of in line with that, another element to your design is utilizing water features. So how can other designers implement water features in a very natural way where it really blends into the backyard living environment?
Yeah, that's another thing that I have actually narrowed my market to a very niche market, because not everyone likes the old-fashioned kidney-shaped pools or free-form pools or things like that. It's not trendy, it's not contemporary, but if you go back to the 1950s and 1960s and look at some of the old pools, and I mean, all it is the cycles go like this and then like this and like this and everything, and I just say, you know what, I don't want to do that. The square rectangle things have their place, and some of the most spectacular pool water features I've ever seen are ones where they've designed and built them like that, like some of the Genesis stuff, like Brian and Skip stuff is breathtaking. Barry Justice, people like that. I've seen the things that it takes my breath away, but I can't subscribe to that because I don't know how. I don't have that training. My 40-odd years has been focused towards the study of what I see in the natural environment around me, and then trying to develop that. So not each client wants that, and I respect that. And I would never put myself in a place where I would pretend to know how to do that. But what I do know how to do is something that appeals to many people that live in a rural country estate situation. So based on that, I try to do whatever I can to make sure that when it's put in there, it actually feels like it belongs. So we'll place rocks that we've acquired from the Niagara Escarpment with horizontal lines with moss on them and things like that. So when you place that rock into a waterfall or beside a pool edge as a retaining wall or by a fire pit terrace, those kinds of, as soon as it's put in there, it looks like it's been there for 10,000 years right now. And so a lot of our water features, the people will look at them and say, wow, that's gorgeous. It's so nice that you built this house around all these beautiful waterfalls and everything. And what part did you do? And then you show them the before picture, and it was like this flat piece of ground in a subdivision. All of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, this looks like the Rocky Mountains. This is awesome, it's beautiful. Well, that's good. We just made one more believer. And that's how it goes. So that's, my idea is, although the waterfalls flowing into the pool are very cool and can look very, very chic, and again, as I mentioned, I don't pretend to know how to do that. But what I do know how to do is to try to create it so that it looks natural. Water naturally erodes away the ground, and all the loose and the fines get washed out until it gets back into harder ground. Look at Niagara Falls. It's a great big crescent, or the Horseshoe Falls, because it has eroded away and worked its way back and continues to do so. So when you're building a waterfall, have it recessed back in, not standing out with this monolithic rocks with water spewing out of it. It's better if it's cut back in and it looks like it has eroded away, and that allows you to have a river mouth, if you will, for better presentation, more natural subconscious acceptance. It also allows you to project the acoustics a certain direction. With the echo chamber here or here, like the tuning of water features is a seminar in itself. But there's three distinct sounds in water feature: the bong sound and the hissing sound, the babbling brook sound. So when you're sitting poolside or you're sitting on a terrace, a fire pit terrace or whatever beside a stream, it's cool if you can have the elevator music in the background, like the hissing sound, the babbling brooks, and that's nice, so that you can have a pleasant conversation in a normal tone of voice. Whereas the bong sound, that's the irritant. That's the one that makes everyone have to go to the washroom all the time. So you would project that to an area where you would have a vantage point way far away. You want to project that, and the static water level will carry the sound. As you know, on a lake, you can hear people whispering on the shore. So you can project that bong sound a long distance, but you don't project it towards the area that's intimate. So you would project that to somewhere where you had a vantage point way far away, but then you keep the pleasant sounds, the friendly sounds close by, especially in a situation with an indoor waterfall. You say to the people, so you like, oh yeah, we love it, it's awesome, it's awesome. You sure it's not too loud? No problem at all. And then we walk out the door going, ha ha ha, give them a couple of weeks, they'll call. And sure enough, within a couple of weeks, hey Randy, how you doing? Good, how's the waterfall? It's great, except one thing. What's that? Like I didn't know what's coming. My wife says she has to go to the bathroom all the time. So then we go back and we start to employ the techniques that we installed to detune the waterfall until it gets to an acceptable level. And you can use it to buffer road noise and all kinds of things, and to mitigate noise that is objectionable, and introduce that pleasant lilt of flowing water, babbling brook. The sunlight picks up the white water, so you walk in, your eye catches it, your ear catches it, your eye comes to it, and then you have just made a journey that you don't even know, because you just went from visual to emotional. You just appeal to the heart. So if you can evoke an emotional response from what you've designed and constructed and made it, number one, functional, number two, realistically maintainable, and number three, aesthetically pleasing, I believe you've accomplished the goal that you've planted in your clients' hearts. As I said, not everybody wants to go down that road, but for the people that kind of thing appeals to, I derive a great amount of pleasure providing that for them, and again, making believers one client at a time.
Well, that's great. That's an important takeaway. Thank you for teaching us a little bit more about naturalistic design.
My pleasure.